This is called the Superstar Session. This is the 2020 gaming KPIs in review. And to present that topic from GameAnalytics is Ioana Hreninciuc. And I may have butchered your name. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Hi, Kate. Hey, everyone. I'll quickly share my screen and I'll put this PowerPoint here in presentation mode. So hopefully you all can see what's going on. I'm going to take you through some stats today, which is what I usually do in my PGC talks, about 2020 and how the mobile industry has changed. In particular, we're going to be looking at some platform differences today. So before I get into that, just a little bit about myself. So I'm the CEO of GameAnalytics. And I've been with GameAnalytics for a few years now, but during this time we've had tremendous growth. We've increased our user reach 8 times. We work with some of the largest publishers globally right now, and our sweet spot is kind of hyper casual. Over there, we work with some of the biggest names in the industry. We also do a lot of just general analytics and data analysis for the industry and benchmarks reports, and we started to release more and more data and products around this. So you're going to hear more from us on this actually in this presentation and generally in the next few months. So these insights that I'm going to share with you today about the industry, a good thing to know, they're with the exception of a single chart, they're all from our product Benchmarks Plus. So GameAnalytics, the core service is free. Benchmarks Plus is a mobile intelligence service, which is actually a paid service, but that uses kind of the GameAnalytics data set that we have to create this industry analysis that you can look at to compare your game and see how it is doing against the industry, or if you're a publisher or an ad partner, for instance, to analyze a game and see if the metrics are healthy, how they're doing in the industry, and if the game is worth investing in, supporting, and so on. Our reach is pretty massive right now. We see more than 2 billion monthly players. We've tracked more than 100,000 mobile games. It's we think it's the largest data set of its kind in the industry. So we're very happy to share these insights with you all. And in terms of what we're going to cover, we look at games by genre. And we, like I said, specifically today, we are going to look at platforms, so differences between iOS and Android, which is a topic that kind of was on a lot of people's minds this year, and also kind of regional differences across platforms and so on. The goal is for you to kind of, at the end of this talk, learn something new about what you can do, or maybe what opportunities there are for your game that maybe you didn't consider before, or didn't consider in as much detail. You kind of thought it was a good idea, but didn't realize that is maybe a great idea and you should prioritize it. Okay, so so far this is an analysis of the first half of the year. It's an analysis of just the lockdown period. We've published this analysis before, but I like to just keep starting with it because it kind of shows that just how strange this year has been from the perspective of mobile gaming. So the lockdowns have had significant impact on the industry. The reason we've not, this graph actually goes to June. The reason we haven't published one of these is because in the summer, things kind of stayed at the same level. Then in September, things kind of started normalizing a bit. And now we're starting just and when I say now, I mean like now, this week, as like countries are starting to go back into lockdown, we're starting to see, again, different patterns. So we are going to put out a new analysis at the end of this year, but so far this is still relevant. Kind of playtime stayed generally around 15% higher even throughout the summer, compared with the rest of the year across the industry. So the industry increased this year through lockdown, and then just generally remained at a higher level until about September, October, when it started going back to a weekly normal trend, like lower traffic during the work week, higher traffic at the weekend. But then now, like I said, it seems to be going back again. So exciting times. Still good year for the industry overall. Generally, let's say industry has been in the green. Now, I wanted to start off the platform analysis with the retention day 7. The reason we use retention day 7 is that it's kind of we see it as the best catch-all metric in the early stages of a game's lifetime. So retention day 1 usually gives a lot of false positives. Retention 28 is too far away to like wait for. So retention day 7 is just in that sweet spot where it allows you to analyze your game very well, but it's also fairly quick. And it's usually a very strong predictor of the game's overall performance. So the reason we wanted to look at this was because this year, there was a lot of conversation around iOS. There's a lot of opportunity on Android, but people don't usually know them as much about the differences between the platforms. So it's kind of assumed that iOS has higher metrics, Android has slightly lower metrics, but the image is quite actually the picture is very complex, and we'll go into why, starting with retention. So on retention, day 7, um, generally, Android retention is lower than iOS. It is generally lower than iOS across the industry by about 4 to 5 full percentage points. So here we were looking at, let's say, 25% for iOS, 21% for Android. But there are also different behaviors in retention. So this year, what we saw in general across multiple metrics is that the Android space was more affected by changes to the industry in general. So you can see, for instance, here that there is a dip in retention around the time of the lockdown. We expect, for instance, if the lockdown starts again, a similar dip to occur. Secondly, you can notice that there's a slight downward trend. So this kind of didn't just have like one short impact, but kind of there was a general more impact. There was a longer term impact on the industry. Whereas iOS, and I know some game developers know this, where iOS users are almost like just a group onto themselves in any country across any game. They're iOS users, and you can see that in some of the metrics where this number, there is a little bit of a drop here during like the beginning of lockdown, but it's pretty much rock solid. Like it's very, very stable. So it's it, Android tends to be much more reactive. So this means that if you are testing a game in a certain period, you may expect that you see, let's say, slightly lower retention for Android, but in particular time periods, that difference may be higher than you expected. So you may think, oh, this game is maybe not doing so well, but it's actually maybe a factor that is affecting the entire industry, and you want to have that information at the time because you may be binning a game that is actually doing well, comparatively well to other Android games. So this is something that is very important to know. Um, Again, Android retention is slightly lower generally, but it's also more affected by seasonal effects and other effects like that. I couldn't exactly tell you why, but this is what we noticed repeatedly. And this makes it, I wanted to focus a bit on hypercasual in particular, because again, it gives a certain picture that retention is still, again, slightly dropping on Android and it's of a certain level, but I wanted to focus a bit again on hypercasual, and we use Arcade to look at hypercasual because it's the genre we most identified with hypercasual so far. We now recently just released a hypercasual genre per se. So the next time you hear benchmarks from us, we're going to be able to look at just hypercasual instead of arcade. But at the time of this analysis, that was not yet released because it's literally just hot off the press. So one thing to know is that in some genres, like hypercasual, which is a good demonstration of this, the difference between the retentions is even higher. So in the case of hypercasual, you get like from 21% on iOS to 14%, which means there's 50% more players on iOS in day 7 than there are on Android for the same number of installs. So this is very, very important to know. When you do look at retention, you do want to consider the genre of your game because different genres have very different retention figures. And again, even if you expect Android to be lower, you may be expecting it to be 2, 3, 4, 5 percentage point difference, but it may be that 7 percentage point difference is absolutely normal, right? The other thing is that you can also see here that there's a general drop in retention for Android compared to the beginning of the year. And again, that this is more pronounced in around lockdown time, but again, that it's generally trending downwards more strongly, whereas again, iOS recovered very quickly, very small drop, barely perceptible, and generally doing very well. So if you have launched Android games this year and felt a little bit confused about what was happening and maybe performance wasn't what you expected from iOS, it's important to know that that's kind of it's you know, you need to expect the unexpected essentially with when releasing a game on Android and compare it to, you know, proper industry benchmarks. The other thing is that there are, you know, there's more than just retention. Like retention is a great metric, but actually there's other metrics where Android is better. Playtime is one of them. So people actually play fewer days on Android, but when they play, they actually add up more time in the game. It's about, I think, 20% higher, yeah, for Android than for iOS, which considering that there are fewer days played, is actually a pretty significant difference overall. If you have like 50% lower day 7 retention, for instance, and then you have 20% more time played. So it does mean that just people have a slightly different behavior. When they play more. But again, here as well, you see this slight downward trend. I would say though, it is also, you can see here a slight downward trend on iOS towards the end as well. We expect that here actually this drop is compounded by just the beginning of the summer. Typically in the summer, simply because of the season, people play somewhat less. So whereas they would be coming back, generally retention may not be as affected over the summer. Playtime will typically be lower. So I think here we are seeing kind of a combination of just general trend with an added seasonal effect of just it's warm outside, people are going out, spending less time on their phone. So this is why you are seeing probably a sharper drop here, and why also it's present in both cases. So we are literally seeing people coming out of lockdown going outside. Is pretty much it. The other thing is that another interesting thing is that session count, which probably explains the playtime, is completely inverted. So there's 50% more sessions on Android for top games than there are on iOS. This is not people don't look at session count as much. The reason I think it's very important is because typically, you know, the first ad in a session, for instance, it's quite valuable. The more sessions you introduce, the more sessions the player plays, can lead to different rewards and so on. So it can affect how you engage with players in your game. And this surprised me personally, that retention, again, is lower and maybe playtime is higher, but that session count is this much higher. So essentially, again, people play fewer days, but when on the days that they play, they have more sessions, which leads to larger total playtime. So this is also kind of very, very interesting to know that the picture is quite complex. You can't just look at a metric and go, oh, you know, iOS is better, and or you know, people come back more on iOS and so on. You actually have to consider that for your LTV analysis, it's important to look at LTV directly, not just use any single metric. We do well with our retention at GameAnalytics, so our retention is considered truly an industry benchmark. Like it is the standard retention that many publishers and developers use. But still, you know, we're trying to pull in more information like ad revenue data in particular and store IP we already have to help people actually measure LTV directly and understand not just, you know, what the engagement metrics are saying, but effectively at the end of the day, if you showed, you know, if there's an extra session played and there's 3 more ads that you showed, or there's another purchase over, you know, a whole week, how much money did that make you? So it's very important, I think, although these metrics, you know, there's like down is up. One, you know, they have different strengths per platform. The important thing to remember is that it does mean that the only overarching metric you can probably look at, if you want to look at only one metric, is LTV, right? And like I said, we're doing more to provide more LTV analysis as well. Secondly, the next part just helps us look at what other opportunities there are. So, okay, there's opportunity to do more with Android. It's a solid, you know, platform. I know people already launch on Android, but there's an opportunity to focus more on Android and to launch directly on Android when you do something, as some publishers are already starting to do. But secondly, again, there's also a regional opportunity. And I wanted to discuss that as well. And the two are also slightly connected, which we'll get to a bit later. But the point was that people tend to distinguish between like North America and Europe, and they have, they're considered different markets. And we just looked at hypercasual to kind of keep comparing apples to apples. So this looks at average session length, so how much people are playing in general on a typical session. And the average session length is quite what we see is that for top performing games is much higher than people expect, even in hyper casual. So it's about 30 minutes. Of course, it varies between something like 7 minutes, or even let's say 5-7 minutes for the top 15% of games. To 30 minutes. So essentially, from in the top 15% of games, the session length, the average session length quadruples from when you get into the top 15 to when you get to the top 2%. So there's like a massive range over there. So it's also an important metric to optimize. But again, an interesting thing here is that North America is far more affected by seasonality than Europe. Europe tends to be more stable, and also Europeans tend to play more, actually. So again, North America is a top tier market, high LTVs, highest in the world sometimes. But again, Europe is like still like a solid gaming market. People actually play slightly more. It's also not a market that requires a lot of localization, but it's a market because because traffic is not as easy to acquire in a targeted way as it is with just like a larger territory like the US, for instance. People don't always explore the full potential of Europe. So that's why I wanted to bring this up, and also, although eCPMs are slightly lower in Europe, so are CPIs. So again, a very kind of good opportunity to look at Europe maybe more closely, consider if more can be done there, because and how the strategy could be changed there, considering people played slightly more, even if eCPMs are slightly lower. The other part is we wanted to look slightly at Asia, and Asia is, we consider it primarily an Android market, which is where kind of the intersection of the two comes in, especially due to China, where there are like, I think 500 million more Android gamers than iOS gamers. So the difference in volume is just absolutely massive. There are like 5 times more Android players. And in Asia in general, session times are actually lower, and the market behaves a bit more like the US than it does Europe in general. But again, session times are still fairly stable, pretty solid, still kind of in the 25 to 30-minute range for top games, still in the kind of 5. Again, if you go into like the top 15, it's about 7 minutes, again, to like 25 minutes. So still like a good playtime, generally worth doing. And now more people are kind of going to Asia. Again, Tencent invested in Voodoo, Quality launched an office there. So it's starting to be taken, it's starting to be a bigger priority as a market, which I personally think it always should have been. But of course, everybody has to do one thing at a time. So now we're seeing this much bigger push, stronger push for China and Asia in general. And many publishers now, again, launching there as a priority, which you can also do as developer, or you can ask your publisher to do, or you can ask them about their China strategy if you want to kind of make the most of your launch and of your time. Okay, so rounding up, because that was a lot of figures and that's a lot of insights. So one of the key points for today is metrics vary, measure LTV. So like we saw, retention is higher, retention day 7 is higher for iOS, lower for Android. And retention is in general is higher for iOS than for Android. But both playtime and session count are higher for Android than for iOS. So do you get a really mixed picture? It's very important to measure your ad revenue correctly and as much as possible at player level, so you can tie it to campaigns and to see where are the territories, the platforms, where are the places where you are making money and your game is profitable. And again, although conventional wisdom stresses that you'll make most of your money in the US, and you probably will, but you can still make more from individual territories, both in Europe and in Asia, than if you just focus on the US as the only market that you care about. Um, the other thing to know, this was a strange year in terms of metrics. Metrics behaved very differently. Typically, retention is and playtime are high in the cold season, and they're lower in the warm season. Some interesting things happen here where in the cold season, if it is a holiday, retention will actually drop. So you'll see this when people go, like traditionally, when there's a holiday and people go back to work, then all of a sudden they stop playing. Some of these effects that we saw did not apply this year at all. So playtime just increased as we were going into the summer instead of decreasing as it normally would with the warm season. Um, there was just a flat line, like there was no, difference between the weekdays and the weekend whatsoever. And then again, that came back briefly in the fall, and now it's going away again. Secondly, again, platforms are affected differently. So on Android, some of these effects will probably be more powerful than on iOS, where iOS players tend to be a more stable group of users. So again, if you do soft launch an Android game, treat it kindly and verify that the numbers make sense. It may be what you would expect to see for Android games in that space. The other thing is, again, just launch in Asia. Like, just try it out. I know people, again, launch iOS games in China in particular, and they avoid Android because even though there are 500 million players, there's such a fragmentation of that ecosystem, but more and more publishers can take you there. And we do advise just publishers who haven't gone there to just do it, because the number of Android mobile players in China is as much as the US and Europe combined. And it is a tier 1 market. So again, very different ecosystem, difficult, but massive, massive opportunity, which is worth exploring. Right. And in terms of metrics, if you found these metrics useful and you want to get more metrics like this, and I'm not around to give you a talk, it's possible to just get these metrics yourself from our benchmarks tool. You have a discount code here if you want to get it. It's insights20. It's just either benchmarks.plus or gameanalytics.com/benchmarks. We just released subgenres. So I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. But the important thing is it helps you to compare your game at any stage and to get an idea of where you are. Secondly, we're working to provide more ad and LTV metrics. We're ingesting more ad data and helping people do more LTV in game analytics. If you do work with us, please integrate your ad revenue. It helps to create reports like this. And also, we highly recommended people, when they soft launch, they A/B test, they use their ad revenue and LTV as part of their A/B testing. So definitely it's possible to do all of these things right now, even with a free tool like GameAnalytics. And in terms of subgenres, so like I said, next time you'll be hearing from us, we're going to go through with much more granularity. These are the subgenres that we just recently, a few days ago, released to Benchmarks Plus. So now instead of looking at just arcade or action or adventure, you will be able to look at platformer games, for instance, or tower defense, or shooter games and so on. So you would be able to look at match-3 puzzles. So it's a very powerful, very specific data set where even if you can't look at one specific app right now, you will be able to just get a very good idea of where you and your game should be in terms of metrics and how the industry is performing at scale. Okay, that's it from me. Another good thing to know, people at GameAnalytics are very friendly. So if you do have a question after this meeting, I'm on the Discord actually for PGC for the rest of the day today, but you can just also email us at insights@GameAnalytics. We genuinely answer that.
And great, thank you so much. And we actually have just a few minutes. You've got a stack of questions piling up in the Q&A, and I don't think we'll get to all of them, but we'll get to a few. Then the others, join Ioana in the Discord, and you can ask your questions there. Ask away. The first question you have is the drop into retention in Android seen in all geographies, or is it more concentrated in some regions?
So that's a very good question. It's across all geographies, but it's slightly different in each geography. So it's both. So it's important to check. And also it depends on the genre of game as well. So you may want to do a combination of what genre your game is versus what geo you're focusing on. But yes, that is a very worthwhile question to ask. And yes, it's different.
All right. So the other question is, as in Asia, a lot of people play during the commute. How did the lockdown and the work from home influence the data there?
Okay, so Asia is interesting. Typically, yes, we do see a very strong pattern in actually in China in particular, where we also did focus on online because it's such a large market. We did some targeted analysis on that, where the retention day 7 was like the single most predictive metric. People play during their commute, but if they didn't come back at the weekend, you were probably gone. Right now, Asia has actually normalized a lot faster than the rest of the world in terms of metrics. So, like I said, the rest of the world didn't really show this kind of, let's say, weekly seasonal pattern. And in Asia, it still appeared. I would say it's slightly diminished from before. So you can tell that maybe either people are working from home, it's not affecting them as much, but I would say the behavior has been a more typical behavior than in the rest of the world.
Great. And I think we can maybe squeeze in a couple more questions. So, when users start playing for 30 minutes, is it fair to say that hypercasual is getting closer data wise to casual games?
I would say it depends. There are still like that 30 minutes is still like the top 2% of games. So if you're looking at and games in the top 10, 20 change so rapidly right now that some of them actually won't even make it in our top 2%, right? So it's you're looking at the very, very top over there. So we do see games that still do very well and are like charting top 10 games, which have lower session length, average session length, and they do like 10 minutes, again, even 7 minutes sometimes. But you also see them with 12 and 15 and so on. So it really depends if you look at the very, very top versus just a regular charting game, right?
Great. And so I think let's do one more question. So, do you believe this new lockdown in Europe will again influence people to play more games?
Yes, so I was looking at the benchmarks this morning to actually see if I can tell you guys something about this. And again, it's like a very, it's just 1 week, but it's just going up. So it's very exciting, and I do think that, and just consider it's always, of course, we're going into cold season, so that has an effect as well. So it's going to be quite pronounced, probably that, especially as it's getting cooler and cooler. So we've actually seen as the weather has gotten warmer in the past few years, a shift in mobile gaming growing. It used to grow like in October, like cold season used to start in October, and now it starts like in November. And now we are in November again. So now, second half of November, December, we expect there to be kind of a very sharp growth at some point with the combination of just the lockdown, cold, and anxiety related to lockdown that people control with mobile games.
That's great. Well, there's a couple more questions, but I'm going to encourage the people who asked them to join you on the Discord. The link is in the chat. So if you folks want to, go over there and ask some Q&A, please do. Thank you so much for that super enlightening talk. That was very useful.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. And yes, like I said, I'm on the Discord, so happy to answer any more questions for you guys there. See ya.
Great. Thanks so much.